Poison Study by Maria V. Snyder. Audiobook by Cinna. Chapter 8. When I awoke the next morning, Valek's list of poisons was still clutched in my hand. I reviewed the poison inventory until the medic discharged me. Bruised muscles protested every movement as I headed for the door. I should have been happy to leave the infirmary, but my nerves preoccupied me. My stomach felt as if it contained a live mouse, trying to chew its way out. The guards stationed outside the infirmary door startled me, but they weren't wearing Brazel's colors, and I belatedly remembered that Valek had assigned them as protection until I reported to his office. I glanced around to get my bearings, but had no idea which direction led to my room. I had been living in the castle for 18 days, but I was still uncertain of its inner layout. The basic shape of the castle itself eluded me, having never seen it from the outside. The prison carriage that had brought me to the castle had been a square box with air holes. I had refused to peer out like some caged animal. When I reached the castle, I squeezed my eyes shut in an attempt to block out the anguish of being chained, groped, and dragged to the dungeon. I guess I could have focused on potential ways to escape, but I had accepted my punishment when I had killed Rayad. As much as I hated to ask the guards for directions to my room, I had no choice. Wordlessly, they guided me through the castle. One walked in front, the other followed. Only after the lead man inspected my room was I allowed inside. My uniforms hung undisturbed in the armoire, but instead of being hidden inside a drawer, my journal lay open on the top of the desk. Someone had read my impressions of poisons and other information. The queasy feeling in my gut was replaced by a cold, hard sensation. The mouse had died, reflecting my sour mood perfectly. I suspected Valek. He was bold enough to have gone through my personal papers. He had probably even reasoned that it was his duty to make sure I wasn't plotting something. After all, I was just the food taster, and not entitled to any privacy. Grabbing the journal and uniforms, I left my room and headed for the baths. The guards waited outside while I soaked in the water. I took my sweet time. Valek and his test could wait. I wasn't going to carry out his orders like some idiotic drone. Chased by Brazel's guards, finding poison in almost all of my meals, and being wagered on like some damn racehorse didn't cause me to be as angry as I was about Valek reading my journal. Arriving at Valek's office, I cut off any smart remark he could make by demanding, "Where's your test?" Amusement touched Valek's face. He rose from behind his desk. Sweeping his arm with a dramatic flourish, he indicated 2 rows of food and drinks on the conference table.
Only one item isn't poisoned. Find it, then eat or drink your selection.
I tasted each item. I sniffed. I gargled. I held my nose. I took small bites. I spat. Some of the food had grown cold. Most of the meals were bland, making the poison easy to spot, while the fruit drinks masked the poison. Finishing the last item, I turned to Valek. "You bastard. They're all poisoned." What a nasty trick. I should have suspected he would pull a stunt like that.
Are you sure?
Of course. I wouldn't touch anything on that table. Valek's gaze was stony as he walked toward me.
I'm sorry, Yelena, you failed.
My heart plunged into my stomach. The dead mouse resuscitated and began to gnaw holes in my gut. I searched the table. What had I missed? Nothing. I was right. I challenged Valek to prove me wrong. Without hesitation, he raised a cup.
This one is clean.
Drink it. I remembered that cup. It was laced with a bitter poison. Valek's hand wavered a bit. He sipped. I bit my lip. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was the cup next to it. Valek held my gaze as he rolled the liquid around his tongue. He spat. I wanted to jump, to cheer, to dance little circles around him. Instead, I said, "Blackberry poison."
Yes,
Valek said. He alternated between examining the cup in his hand and absent-mindedly staring at the rows of cold food. I passed. He nodded, still distracted. Then he walked to his desk, and he gently placed the cup down. Shaking his head, he picked some papers up, only to put them back unread. I should have known you would try to trick me. My heated tone drew his eyes. I wished then that I'd remained silent.
You're all fired up, and it isn't because of the test. Explain yourself.
Explain? Why do I have to explain? Maybe you should explain why you read my journal. There, I'd said it.
Journal?
Valek looked at me in amazement.
I didn't read anything of yours, but if I had, it would have been within my rights.
Why? I demanded. An incredulous look settled on Valek's face. His mouth opened and closed several times before he was able to voice his thoughts.
Yelena, you confessed to murder. You were caught straddling Rayad's body with a bloody knife in your hand. I searched your file for a motive. There was none. Only a report that you refused to answer all questions.
Valek stepped closer. He lowered his voice.
Since I don't know what motivates you to kill, I can't predict if you'll do it again or what might set you off. I'm bound by the code of behavior, so I had to offer you the choice of becoming the new taster.
He drew a deep breath and continued.
You'll be very close to the commander on a daily basis. Until I can trust you, I'll be watching you.
My anger leaked away. Why should I expect Valek to trust me when I didn't trust him? My composure returned. How do I win your trust?
Tell me why you killed Rayad.
You're not ready to believe me. Valek averted his gaze to the conference table. I covered my mouth with my hand. Why had I used the word ready? Ready implied that he would believe me at some point. Pure wishful thinking on my part.
You're right.
We seemed to be at an impasse. I passed your test. I want my antidote. Roused into action, Valek drew a dose, handing it to me. Now what? I asked.
Lunch, we're late.
He hustled me out the door. I gulped the white liquid as we moved. As we neared the throne room, the noise of many voices speaking at once echoed through the halls. 2 of the commander's advisors were arguing. Officers and soldiers clumped behind the 2 advisors. The commander leaned against a nearby desk, listening intently. The group debated the best way to locate and recapture a fugitive. The right side insisted upon using an oversupply of soldiers and tracking dogs, while the left claimed that a few clever soldiers would work. Brute force versus intelligence. The exchange, while loud, lacked anger. The guards stationed around the room stood relaxed. Surmising that this type of debate was common, I wondered if the fugitive was a real person, or just part of a hypothetical exercise. Valek moved next to the commander. I stood behind them. The debate made me squirm because I couldn't help imagining myself as the poor soul being hunted. I pictured myself running through the woods, out of breath, and straining to hear the sounds of pursuit, unable to blend into town because a new face would alert the soldiers on patrol. Bored soldiers, whose only job was to watch, who were familiar with the town's inhabitants. Every citizen of the territory of Ixia had a specific job. After the takeover, everyone had been appointed an occupation. A citizen was allowed to move to a different town or military district, but proper forms were required. A completed transfer request needed approval from the supervisor and proof that a position was being held at the new address. Without the proper documents, a civilian found in the wrong neighborhood was arrested. Visiting other districts was acceptable, but again, only as long as the proper papers were obtained and shown to the soldiers on arrival. While working in isolation with Brazel and Rayad, I had obsessively thought about escape. Thinking of freedom had been better than dwelling on my life as a laboratory rat. With no family or friends outside the manor to hide me, though, the southern lands were my best option, assuming I could penetrate the well-guarded border. I had created elaborate fantasies of stealing away to Cydia, finding an adoptive family, and falling in love. Corny, sentimental rubbish, but it was my only elixir. Every day when the experiments began, my mind would focus on Cydia, finding bright colors, loving gestures, and warmth. Holding those images in my mind, I endured Rayad's tests. But even if I had been given the opportunity to escape, I don't know if I would have seized it. Although I remembered nothing of my birth family, I did have a family living within the manor house. The other lost children who had been taken in, my sisters, my brothers, my children. I learned with them, I played with them, and I took care of them. How could I abandon them? To think of May or Kara taking my place was too much to bear. I bit on my finger until I tasted blood and dragged my thoughts back to the present. I had escaped from Brazil. He would leave the castle in 2 weeks and return home, probably to the next round of experiments with a different laboratory rat. My heart went out to her, whoever she was. Brazil was brutal. She was in for a rough time, but I had saved her from Rayad. Pulling my hand away from my mouth, I inspected the bite mark. Not too deep. It wouldn't scar. I traced the network of semicircular scars that covered my fingers and knuckles. When I looked up, I caught Valek staring at my hands. I laced them behind my back. The commander raised his hand. Quiet descended in an instant.
Excellent points from both sides. We will put your theories to the test. 2 teams.
Pointing to the 2 main debaters, the commander said,
You'll be the captains. Assemble your team and organize a plan of attack. Recruit is needed. Valek will supply a fugitive from one of his men. You have a fortnight to prepare.
The noise level rose as the commander headed toward his office, with Valek and I close behind. Valek shut the office door, muffling the commotion.
Is Marok's escape to City still bothering you?
The commander frowned.
Yes. Sloppy work, that pursuit. Marek must have known you were in MD8. You really need to train a couple of protégés.
Valek looked at him in mock horror.
But then I wouldn't be indispensable.
A quick smile graced the commander's face before he spotted me lingering near the corner.
Well, Valek, you were right about this one. She survived your test.
Then to me he said,
Come here.
My feet obeyed despite my hysterical heart.
As my official food taster, you're to report to me with my breakfast. I'll give you my daily itinerary and expect you to be present at each meal. I will not accept tardiness. Understand?
Yes, sir. He glanced at Valek.
She looks fragile. Are you sure she's strong enough?
Yes, sir.
The commander appeared unconvinced. His golden eyes tracked from me to Valek as he contemplated. I hoped with desperation that he wasn't looking for an excuse to fire me.
All right. Since I missed lunch, Valek, you will join me for an early dinner. Yelena, you start as my food taster tomorrow morning.
Yes, sir. We were dismissed. We returned to Valek's office to gather my extra uniforms and journal. Valek escorted me to his living quarters, located in the central part of the castle. As we traveled the main hallways, I noticed that the bright areas of stone on the wall outnumbered the darker zones. A vast array of paintings must have been taken down. We also passed several large, colorless rooms that had been redesigned as either offices or barracks. It occurred to me that the commander's functional style and stark standards had robbed the castle of its soul. All that remained was a dead stone building, reassigned to purely utilitarian purposes. I was too young to remember what life was like before the takeover, but I had been taught in Brazil's orphanage that the monarchy had been corrupt and its citizens unhappy. The takeover had been just that. To call it a war would be inaccurate. Most of the king's soldiers had switched loyalty to the commander. They had been disgusted with promotions based on bribery and blood ties instead of hard work and skill. Orders to kill people for minor infractions because a member of the elite was angry caused sour feelings among the men. Women had been recruited to the commander's cause, and they made excellent spies. Valek assassinated the key supporters of the king. When the king tried to raise an army to fight the commander's army, he had no defenders. The commander captured the castle without a fight, and little blood was shed. Most of the nobility had been killed, but a few had escaped to Cydia. Valek and I arrived at a pair of massive wooden doors, guarded by 2 soldiers. Valek spoke with the guards, instructing them that I was to be allowed access as needed. We entered a short hallway with 2 doors on opposite sides. Valek unlocked the door on the right and explained to me that the other led to the commander's apartment. Valek's living quarters turned out to be an expansive suite of rooms. Coming in from the gloomy hallway, I was struck by the brightness of the main L-shaped living area. Windows as thin as a tiger's stripes allowed sunlight to pour in. Piles of books occupied every corner and tabletop. Hand-sized gray rocks, streaked with white and multicolored crystals, were scattered throughout. Small black statues of animals and flowers glinted with silver. The statues dotted the room. Delicate and intricately detailed, they were similar to the panthers on Valek's office desk and were the room's only decoration. A considerable collection of weapons hung on the walls. Some of the weapons were old, dust-covered antiques that hadn't been used in years, while others shined. One long, thin knife still had fresh blood on the blade. The crimson liquid gleamed in the sunlight, causing a chill to snake through my body. I wondered who had been on the wrong end of that blade. To the left of the entrance was a stairway, and 3 doors lined the right wall of the living area. Valek pointed to the first door on the right.
That room is yours until Brazel leaves the castle. I suggest you get some rest.
He picked up 3 books from an end table.
I'll be back later. Don't go out. I'll bring you dinner.
Valek left, but then came back before the door shut.
Lock the door behind me. You should be safe here.
Safe, I thought, turning the bolt, was the last thing I could ever feel here. Anyone who knew how to pick a lock could sneak in, grab a weapon, and have at me. I examined the swords on the wall and sighed with some relief. The weapons were anchored securely. I tugged hard on a mace, just to be sure. The clutter surrounding my door was thicker than around the other 2, and I discovered why when I entered. Clean, box-shaped areas were outlined by the thick dust that still coated the floor, bed, bureau, and desk. The room had been used for storage. Instead of cleaning it, Marg must have just moved the boxes out and considered her job done. Marg's minimal work was a not-so-subtle hint of her vast dislike for me. Perhaps it would be best to avoid her for a while. Inside the room, the bedding was filthy. A musty smell permeated. I sneezed. There was a small window, and after wrestling with the shutters, I managed to open it. The furniture was made of expensive ebony. Intricate carvings of leaves and vines curled down chair legs and across drawers. When I wiped the dust off the headboard, I uncovered a delicate garden scene with butterflies and flowers. After I stripped the bed of its dirty sheets and stretched out on the mattress, my impression of Marg as a harmless grump with a grudge evaporated. At that moment, I saw that a message had been written in the dust on the desk. It read, "Murderer, the noose waits."